This is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at the pens I currently have inked up, and I'm going to give a quick update on the status of my search for a suitable ink agitator for my little Kaweco converter. And these arrived yesterday, and thank goodness Matthew mentioned in the comments that he uses stainless steel 316, and I thought, I didn't even pay attention to what type of stainless steel this was made out of. I did a quick search for stainless steel 316 and saw that it was one of the most corrosion resistant types of stainless steel, and I didn't know there were different types. So I went back and took a look at the product description for the beads that I bought, and these aren't even labeled as stainless steel. I think these were called chrome steel or something like that. And I went through and read the product description, and it even says these beads will rust, keep them away from moisture. So I won't be using these in my little converter, but I did get online and did a search for actual stainless steel beads and found some. These are 2mm, and I went ahead and wanted to see how they fit in my converter, and they just fall right out of the mouth. So I got 3mm this time, and they are stainless steel 316L. So when those come in, I'm going to do a little test. I'll put one of these and one of the stainless steel beads in some ink and leave them there for a while and see what happens. One of the ink pens I have inked up this week is my Pilot Metropolitan. I bought it with a cursive medium nib, but I switched it out with, it's marked as a fine nib, but you can see there's not any tipping on it. This is actually a cursive fine nib that came on my Pilot Pluminix, and I put Jacques Blue Plenitude in this. I normally, whenever I'm doing my writing samples, I will use one of my small stub nibs, one of my Pilot stub nibs, but I didn't this time. And Blue Plenitude is such a nice, wet, highly saturated ink. I thought it would work well in this dry writing Pilot stub nib. So I've been writing with it this week. I really like the look of this ink. The only downside is, let's see, it does tend to bleed through. The downside of this ink is if I don't write with it for, I would say, maybe more than 12 hours, the ink tends to dry in the nib, which is kind of surprising to me with it being such a wet, flowy ink. And you can see up here the P, it was starting to dry up a little bit, but once it gets flowing, it's a really nice writer. But it's got two strikes against it: the tendency to dry out in the nib and how bad it wants to bleed through papers. Another pen I have inked up is my Kaweco AL Sport, the Golden Espresso, and I have it inked up with Jacques Vert Atlantide. And I am enjoying this ink very much. I was kind of concerned about putting a shimmer ink in this pen, but this is a very wet, flowy ink, and I haven't had any trouble with it at all. I have had some inks that, if it's a drier ink, it wants to start out writing very nicely and then get lighter and lighter. And other people have mentioned that they have the same trouble just with certain inks, but this is not one of them. I did writing samples with both of these pens and inks in my everyday journal, and these are just full page writing samples. I wanted to see how the inks performed, whether the nibs wanted to run dry. And I was very impressed with the Kaweco because it does have that tendency to want to run dry, and it didn't with this ink. So this is a nice, good flowy ink, especially since it has shimmer in it. That was good to know. And with the blue Plenitude, the only issue I had was some of the letters would look a little wispy, like this I right here. But the more I thought about it, this is a really good flowy ink. I think it's just because it's a fairly crisp italic nib, and you really have to be careful how you turn your pen. The nib has to really be lined up, and I can still smell this on the page, and this has been on here for an entire day. I did these writing samples yesterday. I'm really happy with the way both of these inks look, so I'm considering getting a bottle of this. I'm just using a sample right now, but if it performs that well with this pen, I've been kind of fond of this color. This has some of the prettiest shimmer. It's got a silver and gold, and I just like the look of that. I'm not a huge fan of shimmer inks, but from the first time I used this one, I was just very fond of it. All right, and my last pen that I have inked up is a Platinum Preppy that I've done a little work on the nib. I had a Platinum Preppy several months ago, a medium nib that I ground into a stub, and on this one I tried grinding a medium nib into a blade, or as close to an architect type nib that I could get. I made a video of that one, and I've edited the video. I didn't talk during the video though. I was going to do a voiceover, and I just never have gotten around to doing the voiceover. Putting an architect grind on a nib is significantly more difficult than a stub grind, and I knew that going into it, but it just wasn't fun at all, and I've just been procrastinating doing that voiceover. But let's take a look at how it writes. And I've discovered through this that I prefer stub nibs over a blade or an architect grind. I don't know how noticeable this is going to be. Let's just take a look at it. I'm going to call this a medium blade. And this just has the cartridge that came with the Preppy. And let's see how noticeable the line variation is going to be. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit and do that one more time. This was a medium nib, and the downstrokes are now the size that you would see in a fine nib, and the cross strokes are still a medium. So it's not a tremendous amount of line variation, but this is the most you can get, I would say, out of a nib that was originally a medium. Now, I've discovered that the downstrokes are the smoothest, and the cross strokes aren't scratchy, but there's more feedback than you have with the downstrokes just because the downstrokes are thinner, and I just don't like that feeling. I prefer the cross strokes being thinner and the downstrokes being wider. I just like the feel of that type of a nib better. Now, let me zoom back out. I do like the reverse writing, turned out nicely. It's a nice, maybe fine or extra fine. And it writes consistently and it's smooth. What I think I'm going to do is use this pen in my checkbook. Since I'm not super fond of just the feeling of how it writes. It's not horrible. Writing a check with it is not going to be unbearable. It's just not my favorite. I wouldn't want to use it for journaling. So I'm going to use this in my checkbook. So this afternoon I did a quick water test, and this was just a piece of paper that I already had with some writing samples on it, and the cartridge in the Platinum Preppy did great. And I also had a writing sample with the Jacques Blue Plenitude, and all the blue washed away, and you have a nice, easy to read gray. And the same thing with the Vert Atlantide. The green washed away, and you're just left with the gray. And I don't know if it'll be, how visible it will be, but the shimmer's still there. Maybe you can see it in the Atlantide when I move it. So I really am leaning toward getting a bottle of this Vert Atlantide, and I'm going to use the Preppy for my checkbook, and I'm really enjoying all of these pens this week, but my favorite is the Kaweco AL Sport. I am really liking this pen. I'm glad I invested in the 14K fine nib, but I really like the medium nib that came with it. The only thing you have to pay attention to with this pen, and really it's with all my Kaweco pens, my Kaweco Skyline Sport, the plastic one, has the same issue. You really need to stick to wetter inks or use an ink additive like Van Ness's White Lightning, or like some people have suggested, dish soap can have the same effect, but that's what I'm using this week. If you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.